Bob Marley, Real Situation. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We're on the road. We're in Watertown, Massachusetts. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama and European leaders arrived in France today ahead of a key NATO summit to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the alliance. Obama will visit Germany today as well, which is also playing host to the summit. The French city of Strasbourg is under security lockdown with 25,000 police on patrol following a day of clashes between protesters and riot police. 300 people were arrested and a German press photographer was hospitalized after being hit in the stomach by a police rubber bullet. Tens of thousands of demonstrators have descended on Strasbourg and the German towns of Kehl and Baden-Baden to protest the summit. France has temporarily reinstated border controls with Germany to restrict access to protesters. The focus of the summit will be Afghanistan, where 70,000 troops, mostly under NATO command, are at war. President Obama will use the talks to enlist support for his escalation of the war. Obama sent 21,000 extra U.S. troops to Afghanistan and is considering deploying 10,000 more. Meanwhile, Taliban militants in Pakistan marked the start of the two-day summit by destroying a fleet of 9 parked NATO vehicles in transit for Afghanistan. Last week, President Obama defended his decision to send more troops to Afghanistan.
The world cannot afford the price that will come due if Afghanistan slides back into chaos or al-Qaeda operates unchecked. We have a shared responsibility to act, not because we seek to project power for its own sake, but because our own peace and security depends on it. And what's at stake at this time is not just our own security, it's the very idea that free nations can come together on behalf of our common security.
To talk about Afghanistan, NATO, and the state of U.S. economic and military power in the world, today we're joined by one of the world's most astute thinkers and most important intellectuals of our time, linguist, philosopher, social critic, political dissident, Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is a prolific author and institute professor emeritus at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, just down the road from here, where he taught for over half a century. Among his many dozens of books are Rogue States, The Rule of Force in World Affairs, The New Military Humanism, Lessons from Kosovo, Fateful Triangle, the United States, Israel, and the Palestinians, Manufacturing Consent, Necessary Illusions, Thought Control in Democratic Societies, and Failed States, The Abuse of Power and the Assault on Democracy. It's a great collection of his work just out now, edited by Anthony Arnov, called The Essential Chomsky. Noam Chomsky, welcome to Democracy Now!
Very glad to be with you.
It's great to be with you here in Massachusetts in the studio instead of talking to you on the phone at home. Yeah. So let's start with what's happening with this NATO summit celebrating 60 years, France rejoining after more than 4 decades. Your analysis?
Well, the obvious question is why bother celebrating NATO at all? In fact, why does it exist? It's 20 years now, almost, since the Berlin Wall fell. NATO was constructed on with the reason, whether one believes it or not, that it was going to defend Western Europe from Russian assault. But once the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union was beginning to collapse, that reason was gone. So, first question, why does NATO exist? Well, in fact, the answers are interesting. Mikhail Gorbachev made a remarkable concession at that time to the United States. NATO is essentially run by the United States. He offered to allow a reunited Germany to join NATO, a hostile military alliance.
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute, Noam, because there's a lot of static on your mic, and we want to fix that. So we're going to go to a music break, and then we're going to come back to you. We're talking to Noam Chomsky. Stay with us. Noam, you were just saying at MIT they have these technological problems, too, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Right, the leading technological institute in the world. At commencement, the PA system almost inevitably breaks down. So that's familiar.
Briefly summarize what you were just saying if people were having trouble hearing you through the static.
Well, I think the first question to ask about NATO is why it exists. we're now approaching the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, unification of Germany, first steps in the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, the alleged reason for NATO's existence was to protect the West against a Russian assault. You can believe what you like about the reason, but that was the reason. By 1989, that reason was gone. So why is there NATO? Well, that question did arise. Mikhail Gorbachev offered at that time to the United States, which runs NATO, that he would permit a unified Germany to join NATO, a hostile military alliance aimed at the Soviet Union. Now, that's a remarkable concession. If you look back at the history of the 20th century, Germany alone had practically destroyed Russia several times. And now he was offering to let a reunited, militarized Germany join a hostile military alliance backed by the most awesome military power in history. Well, there was a quid pro quo. George Bush I was then president, James Baker, Secretary of State, and they agreed, in their words, that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east, which would at least give Russia some breathing room. Now, Gorbachev also proposed a nuclear weapons-free zone from the Arctic to the Mediterranean, which would have, again, given some protection and, in fact, security for peace. Well, that was just rejected. I don't even think it was answered. Well, that's where things stood in 1989, 90. Then Bill Clinton was elected. One of his first acts was to break the promise and expand NATO to the east, which, of course, is a threat to Russian security. Now, the pretext given, for example, by his Strobe Talbot, who was the Undersecretary of State for Eastern Europe, is that that was necessary to bring the former satellites into the European Union. But that can't be. There are states inside the European Union that are not part of NATO. Austria, Finland, Sweden, so that's irrelevant. But it was a threat, and Russia, of course, reacted to the hostile threat. It increased tension. Well, going up to the present, President Obama's National Security Advisor, James Jones, has been a strong advocate of the view that NATO should expand further to the east and to the south, and that, in fact, it should, to the east and to the south means to control the energy-producing regions. The head of NATO, Dutch Secretary of General De Hoop Scheffer, has advocates that NATO should take the responsibility for protecting energy supplies to the West, pipelines, sea lanes, and so on. Well, now we're getting to Afghanistan, which is right in has always been of great geostrategic importance because of its location. Now more than ever because of its location relative to the energy-producing regions in the Gulf region and in Central Asia. So yes, that's what we're seeing. Actually, there's more to say about NATO, about why it exists. So we might look back, say, 10 years to the 50th anniversary. Well, the 50th anniversary of NATO was a gloomy affair. Right at that time, NATO was bombing Serbia illegally, as everyone admitted, claiming it was necessary for humanitarian reasons. That was at the NATO summit. There was much agonizing about how we cannot tolerate atrocities so near Europe. Well, that was an interesting comment, since at that time NATO was supporting atrocities right inside NATO. Turkey, for example, was carrying out, with massive U.S. aid, huge atrocities against its Kurdish population, far worse than anything reported in Kosovo. Right at that time in East Timor, you're not going to praise yourself, so if you don't mind, I will. At the time of the Dili massacre, which you and Alan heroically exposed, atrocities continued. And in fact, in early 1999, they were picking up again. with strong U.S. support. Again, far beyond anything reported in Kosovo. That's the U.S. and Britain, the core of NATO, right at the same time. In fact, Dennis Blair, President Obama, inside President Obama's national security circle, he was sent to Indonesia, theoretically, to try to get the Indonesian army to stop carrying out the mounting atrocities. But he supported them. He met with the top Indonesian general, General Wiranto, and essentially said, go ahead. And they did. And in fact, those atrocities could have been stopped at any moment